A lonely man finds a too-old Vulpine bride abandoned at the dock and marries her instantly. Cale had always preferred the quiet of the docks at night. While the city hummed and glowed with neon lights filled with the chatter of traders, the occasional laughter of off-duty workers, and the harsh whine of cargo shuttles, the far edge of the harbor was different. Here, the air carried the scent of salt and oil, and the sound of waves crashing against the metal bulkheads was a soothing constant. The lights of the city reflected on the water in streaks of blue and gold, casting a surreal glow over the rusting containers and stacked crates that stretched toward the horizon. It was in this quiet, overlooked corner that Cale felt at home. He was a solitary man by choice, though some might have called him lonely. At 42, Cale's hair was streaked with gray, his hands calloused from years of repairing engines, ships, and machines, and his eyes held a quiet intelligence, the kind that only came from observing the world with patience and care. People in the city knew him as an engineer who could fix anything, but most didn't know him personally. Cale preferred it that way. Conversations felt heavy, and the casual chatter of taverns had never appealed to him. Here, among the docks, the machines, and the sea were enough company. That night, a storm rolled in from the horizon. Clouds, heavy and dark, swallowed the stars, and the wind began to whip around the metal walkways. Cale pulled his coat tighter and continued along the dock, checking the seals on the cargo crates before the storm hit full force. That's when he heard a soft, almost imperceptible whimper. He paused, squinting through the rain. The sound came from a crate near the far end, one that seemed abandoned, its edges rusted and worn. Cale's curiosity got the better of him. He approached, his boots slipping slightly on the wet metal. As he drew closer, he noticed movement inside the crate, a faint shifting of shapes, a delicate, cautious motion. Cale crouched and tapped on the crate. "Hello?" He called over the roar of the wind and waves. "Are you all right in there?" The shifting stopped, and a soft, trembling voice responded, "Please, help me." Cale frowned. He had seen many things in his time at the docks, but this was unusual. The voice was feminine, melodic, yet foreign, tinged with an accent that he couldn't place. He unlatched the crate carefully, and the lid creaked open. Inside was a woman, or rather, a being that resembled a woman but with distinct differences. Her face was delicate with pointed features, golden-orange fur streaked with darker tones, and large expressive eyes that shimmered with intelligence and fear. Her ears were long and tapered, twitching slightly as she looked up at him. A bushy tail curled around her legs, partially hidden by tattered cloth. Cale blinked, unsure what to say. You're... "I am Liara," she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried a strength that made him take notice. "They left me, because I am too old. No one wants me now. I was discarded." Cale's heart tightened. He had heard of such things, aliens discarded like old tools when they were no longer considered useful. But to see it firsthand stirred something deep in him. He reached into the crate, helping her to her feet. She was lighter than he expected, but her limbs trembled from exhaustion. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders, shielding her from the rain. "Why? Why would they do this?" he asked, not expecting an answer. "They value youth above all else," she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Appearance, strength, breeding. When you no longer meet the standards, you are nothing." Her ears drooped, and her tail twitched in nervous agitation. Cale shook his head, gripping the edge of the crate. "I don't care about any of that," he said firmly. "You're coming with me." Liara hesitated, her large eyes studying him. There was suspicion there, as if every human she had met before had seen her as an object rather than a being. "Why?" she asked softly. No one takes abandoned Vulpine women." "Why would you?" Cale shrugged, trying to sound casual, though his chest tightened. "Because it's the right thing to do. And I don't like seeing anyone left out in the rain, alone and afraid." For the first time, Lyra's tense posture relaxed slightly. She let him guide her away from the crate and down the dock toward his small workshop at the edge of the harbor. The wind gusted, rain soaked them through, but Cale barely noticed. His mind was focused entirely on getting her to safety. The workshop was small, it's almost cramped, but it was warm and filled with the comforting smell of machine oil, metal, and old electronics. Cale had lived alone there for years, but now, as he set a chair by the heater for Liara to sit, he realized it was no longer just his sanctuary. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. But it was a weight he welcomed. Liara sat cautiously, her tail wrapped tightly around her legs. She watched Cale with wide, intelligent eyes as he went to a cupboard and retrieved clean blankets and water. He offered her both, and she accepted silently, sipping the water as her gaze wandered around the workshop. Her eyes lingered on tools, engines, and mechanical parts arranged neatly along shelves. "You fix machines?" she said finally, her voice curious. "Not people." Cale smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Machines are easier. They don't complain. They don't judge you." But sometimes he paused, glancing at her. "Machines aren't enough." Lyra's ears twitched. "You help me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Cale said firmly. "Tonight at least, you're safe. I'll figure out the rest later." The storm outside raged, lightning illuminating the workshop in jagged flashes. The rain pounded the roof, creating a steady rhythm that almost felt comforting. Liara leaned back in the chair, exhaustion finally overtaking her tension. Her head drooped slightly, and Cale noticed the faint scars along her arms, marks of neglect and past abuse. He frowned. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. "They. My owners," she said, voice trembling. "Or what they called owners. I was meant to be perfect, useful. Now, I am old, unwanted." Cale felt a surge of anger at the injustice. Humanity or any species was capable of cruelty when blinded by rules and superficial standards. But Cale's anger was tempered by something else. Determination. Determination to help her, to make sure she was not abandoned again. He pulled a stool closer and began checking her for injuries more carefully. Her body was surprisingly strong, despite the thin frame and tremors. He cleaned minor cuts, wrapped her wrists in soft cloth, and applied salves from his supply. She watched him silently, not resisting, not moving away. There was a trust forming, fragile but real. Hours passed. The storm subsided, leaving only the occasional drizzle and the gentle lapping of water against the docks. Cale had finally managed to clean, feed, and make Liara as comfortable as possible. She sat quietly, observing him as he tidied the workshop, her head tilted slightly, ears flicking. "You are different from others," she said after a long pause. "Most humans. They look, then judge. You just help." Cale shrugged, though a small smile touched his lips. "Maybe I'm just tired of judging. Maybe I think some things are more important than appearances. Maybe." He stopped, realizing words could only go so far. He had acted, and that was what mattered. Lyra's eyes softened, a faint glow of trust and curiosity in their golden depths. I don't know what to call this," she admitted. "Gratitude. Relief? Fear? Call it whatever you want," Cale said lightly, though inside he felt something unfamiliar, flicker of connection, fragile but undeniable. "Just know you're safe here. For tonight, and until you decide what comes next." She nodded slowly, curling into a blanket on the chair. Cale watched her for a long time, the quiet of the workshop around them, distant city lights flickering through the rain-streaked windows. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond machines and solitude. Outside, the harbor settled into an uneasy calm. The waves gliding under the dock, the wind softening to a whisper. Cale knew this night was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that this abandoned Vulpine woman, the one society had discarded as too old, was about to change his life in ways he could not yet imagine. And perhaps, in her own quiet way, he would change hers. The night stretched on. The rain eased into a gentle drizzle. Cale moved to the window and looked out at the dock, where the crates and containers glistened in the weak light. Liara, asleep now, stirred occasionally, her tail twitching, ears flicking. Cale felt a strange mixture of protectiveness and anticipation. Something new was beginning, something neither of them could have planned, and for the first time in years, Cale did not feel alone. The morning after the storm was calm, almost deceptively peaceful. Mist hovered over the docks, softening the jagged edges of containers and cranes. The city beyond remained alive with movement, but Cale's little workshop felt like a hidden world, suspended in time. Liara had slept for hours, exhausted from the night's ordeal, and Cale stood by the window, staring out at the water. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, heavier than any machine he had ever repaired. She was not an engine or a device. She was a living being, abandoned by a society that measured worth in numbers and appearances. When Liara finally stirred, Layar offered her a cup of warm tea. She accepted, her long fingers curling around the cup as if it were a lifeline. Her fur was still damp from the storm, and the soft light highlighted the streaks of gold and orange in her coat. She looked at him carefully, studying him as though trying to guess his intentions. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly. "Most humans wouldn't. Most would have walked away." Cale shrugged, though his eyes held a quiet determination. "Maybe most humans are like that, but not everyone. And I don't like seeing anyone left out in the rain." That part is easy." Liara tilted her head, the tip of one ear flicking curiously. "But why me? You don't know me? You barely know what I can do, and yet you chose to risk trouble for me? For an alien." Cale looked away, uncomfortable with praise. "I've spent too long avoiding trouble. And sometimes, trouble finds the right person to help, whether they like it or not. Tonight that person was you." For a moment Liara said nothing, sipping her tea in silence. Then she spoke, almost whispering, "I don't know if I can trust anyone again. I've been used, discarded, treated like an object, and I am too old for them to care." Cale set his own cup down and crouched to her level, looking into her eyes. "You're not an object. You're alive. You have thoughts, feelings, and intelligence, and that is worth more than youth, appearance, or usefulness." Liara blinked, her golden eyes reflecting both relief and something deeper curiosity. She had never encountered a human who spoke with such honesty and care. Many had talked, but few had meant what they said. Slowly, she allowed herself to relax, leaning back against the chair. Over the next few days, Cale and Liara established a quiet rhythm. He repaired small things in the workshop, while she observed, occasionally helping by handing tools or offering suggestions. It was strange, almost domestic, yet filled with an unspoken tension. Neither fully knew the other, yet a bond began to form. Liara had a sharp mind. She learned quickly, not just the tools and machines Cale worked with, but also human habits and customs. She asked questions, her ears twitching with curiosity. And Cale found himself enjoying her company in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Her voice was soft but carried authority, and her presence seemed to fill the empty spaces in his life. "You know," Cale said one morning, "adjusting a delicate circuit, you're not what they expected." Lyra's tail flicked. "I am aware. They said I was too old, too weak, no longer acceptable." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of defiance. "But you see differently." "I see someone who survived when others would have given up," Cale replied, focusing on the tiny wires. "Someone who can think, plan, and act. Someone worth knowing." She regarded him silently, ears flicking in thoughtful contemplation. "Most humans only see what is useful to them, you see? Something else." "Maybe I've learned that usefulness isn't the only measure of value," he said quietly. "Sometimes the world tells you what matters. Sometimes it's wrong." Lyra's gaze softened. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a little hope. She had been abandoned so many times that trust was nearly impossible, yet this human offered her something she had not expected. Genuine care. But the world outside the workshop was not so kind. Rumors had already begun to spread among the dock workers. Whispers of the human who had taken in a discarded Vulpine woman. The one they called too old reached ears that valued profit and power above compassion. Some came to gawk, others to challenge Cale, questioning why he would involve himself in what they considered someone else's property. One afternoon, A group of dock merchants confronted Kale. They were a mix of humans and aliens, all carrying the arrogance of wealth and authority. Kale, one called, his tone sharp. We hear you've been harboring a Vulpine. She belongs to the house of Catherine. She was discarded, yes, but you have no right to keep her. Kale looked up from his work calmly. She isn't property. She's a person, and she stays here because I said so. The merchants exchanged incredulous glances. You're defying the law, one hissed. You'll be punished. She must return. Kale set his tools down, his face calm but firm. I won't send her back. Not to be treated like an object again? Liara, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. I am not property. I make my own choices. Kale has not forced me. I choose to stay here. The merchants froze. Her words carried a clarity and authority they had not expected from a being they considered worthless. Kale saw the spark of pride in her eyes, and he felt a deep respect for her resilience. The confrontation ended without violence. But the message was clear. Society's expectations and rules would challenge them at every step. Kale and Liara were outsiders in their own world. Yet, there was an unspoken thrill in their defiance, a quiet joy in standing together against forces that sought to control or judge them. As the days passed, Kale learned more about Liara's past. She had been trained for specific tasks, skilled in navigation, languages, and diplomacy among alien traders. Yet when her youth faded, so did her perceived value. Kale listened silently, never interrupting, offering only warmth, safety, and a chance to be herself. Liara, in turn, began to trust him more fully, revealing her humor, her curiosity, and the quiet strength she had cultivated despite her abandonment. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the edge of the workshop, Liara spoke softly. You know, in my world, this would have been impossible. A human protecting a discarded Vulpine. It should not happen. Kale smiled faintly. Maybe that's why it does. Sometimes the impossible is the only thing that matters. They sat in silence, the sun painting the horizon with streaks of red and gold, the water reflecting the colors like a living mirror. Lyra's tail brushed against Kale's hand accidentally, and neither moved away. There was comfort in the presence of another who understood the fragility of life and the strength it took to survive it. Over the next week, the workshop became their small universe. They shared meals, repaired machines, and explored ideas and stories from each other's worlds. Liara learned to operate simple engines under Kale's guidance, her curiosity insatiable. Kale, in turn, discovered that her insights often surpassed his own, especially when it came to understanding alien cultures and strategies. It was not just companionship, it was partnership. They balanced each other in ways neither had expected. Kale realized that the loneliness he had carried for decades was not a void to be filled with machines or silence, but with trust, respect, and shared purpose. Liara realized that safety and kindness could exist in a world that had always treated her as disposable. Yet, even in this small haven, danger lingered. The dock workers whispered, merchants plotted, and there were rumors of others, humans and aliens alike, who would not forgive Kale's defiance. Each knock on the workshop door, each shadow passing the windows, reminded them that their sanctuary was temporary. The world outside demanded conformity, obedience, and the subjugation of those considered weaker or older. Kale did not flinch. Let them come, he said one night, checking the locks. We'll face them together. You're not alone. Liara looked at him, her golden eyes shining in the dim light. I believe you, she said. I trust you. That trust was fragile, like glass, yet it was real. And Kale understood something essential. Humanity's true strength was not in weapons or technology, but in courage, empathy, and the willingness to stand for what was right, even when the world mocked or threatened you. As the second week passed, Kale and Liara began to plan. Not out of fear, but out of necessity. The docks were their home for now, but they both knew they could not remain hidden forever. Lyra's skills could help them navigate the broader society, and Kale's ingenuity could protect them. Together, they were no longer two vulnerable individuals. They were a force quietly preparing to challenge a world that had judged too quickly. Too harshly one night after another long day of repairs and study, they sat by the small heater, watching the city lights flicker across the harbor. Liara leaned her head on Kale's shoulder, a gesture of trust that spoke volumes. "I never thought I would find this," she murmured. "Someone who sees me. For me, someone who cares." Kale put his arm around her, a rare warmth spreading through his chest. "I never thought I would either," he admitted. "But sometimes life gives you the unexpected, and when it does, you hold on." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the quiet rebellion unfolding in the little workshop by the docks. But inside, a new world was forming, one built, not on societal expectations, but on choice, courage, and the human capacity to value life beyond appearances. Kale and Liara were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was enough for now. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, reflected in the calm waters of the harbor, the calm of the harbor was deceptive. For weeks, Kale and Liara had found a fragile peace, but the murmurs of the city, the whispers of dockworkers, and the judgmental eyes of merchants could not be ignored forever. Kale had hoped that quiet resolve would be enough to protect them, but the world outside had a way of testing courage in unexpected ways. It began with small signs. Tools went missing from Kale's workshop, nothing valuable, but enough to show that someone was watching. At night, shadows moved along the dock, distant yet deliberate, as if measuring the walls and windows for weakness. Kale did not panic. Instead, he tightened locks, reinforced the workshop, and set up crude alarms with wires and sensors. Liara, ever observant, suggested ways to improve their security. Using skills Kale had not realized she possessed. "They're testing us," she said one evening, crouched beside a panel of blinking lights. Her ears twitched with concentration. "They want to see if we are careless or afraid. If we falter, they'll come harder." Kale nodded, tightening a bolt on a makeshift barrier. "Then we won't falter. They may have numbers, influence, and arrogance, but we have knowledge, preparation, and resolve. That counts for more than they think." Liara gave a small, approving nod. "And trust," she added quietly. "You trusted me. I trust you. That makes us unpredictable." He smiled faintly. "Unpredictable can be dangerous." The real confrontation came sooner than they expected. A morning like any other turned into chaos when a group of dock enforcers, led by a human merchant named Torvik, arrived at the workshop. They carried official papers, weapons, and an air of authority that demanded obedience. Torvik's eyes flicked to Liara, narrowed in disdain. "You have kept a Vulpine in your custody against the will of the House of Kethrin," Torvik said, his voice sharp, carrying across the small workshop. "This is a violation of the law. She belongs to us, and you will return her immediately." Kale stood tall, calm, yet unyielding. "She belongs to herself," he said firmly. "She chooses where she stays, and she chooses here with me." The enforcers exchanged skeptical glances. "You don't understand the consequences," one said. "Defying the house brings penalties. Fines, imprisonment, or worse." Liara stepped forward, her golden eyes flashing. "I am not property. I will not go back. I make my own choice, and I choose to stay." Her voice carried a confidence Kale admired. She was no longer trembling or fearful. She was standing, proud and fully herself. Torvik sneered. "And what will you do if we take her by force?" Kale did not hesitate. He activated a series of mechanisms he had prepared in the days before. Small barriers slid across doors and windows, wires sparked faintly, and sensors blared with a low hum. It was not enough to stop a determined attack, but it bought them precious time. Liara moved beside him, assessing the situation with sharp intelligence. "We cannot fight them head-on. They are too many. But we can outsmart them. We can delay, mislead, and survive." Together, they became a team. Kale operated the workshop defenses, moving swiftly to lock compartments and activate alarms. Liara anticipated the enforcers' movements, signaling Kale where to block doors or distract intruders. It was a delicate dance of strategy, improvisation, and courage. The enforcers tried to push through, but every step forward was met with resistance. Torvik's frustration grew. You think clever tricks will save you? A human and a discarded Vulpine? This is meaningless. Kale ignored him. He had learned long ago that threats were only powerful when feared. Meaningless or not, he said, we will not give up. Not today. Hours passed in tense struggle. The enforcers, though trained, found themselves frustrated by unexpected obstacles. Kale's preparations slowed them. Liara's quick thinking and knowledge of alien behavior made them unpredictable. Each delay increased the risk of reinforcement arriving, but it also proved their strength. Eventually, Torvik, furious, ordered a retreat. This is not over, he spat. You will regret this defiance. She will be ours, and you will pay. Kale and Liara watched as the enforcers disappeared into the mist of the docks. The silence that followed was both relieving and sobering. They had survived, but only barely, and the world outside had made its message clear. Their peace was temporary, and danger would always return. Liara collapsed into a chair, tail flicking nervously. They will come back, she whispered. Stronger, more prepared. And next time, they might not leave without hurting us. Kale sat beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. Then we prepare. We plan, we learn, and we face them together. They may have power and authority, but we have courage, skill, and trust. Lyra's ears twitched. Trust. Yes, that is something they cannot understand or predict. They underestimated. Over the next days, Kale and Liara worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses and plan for the future. Kale taught Liara more about mechanics and strategy, while Liara shared knowledge of alien law, customs, and negotiation. Together, they transformed the small workshop into a secure, almost self-sufficient sanctuary. But the true change was not in the locks or alarms, it was in them. They had begun to see each other as partners, equals, and allies. Kale admired Lyra's resilience and intelligence. She admired his courage and quiet moral strength, where once they had been two lonely individuals. Now they were a force that could challenge even the rigid expectations of society. One evening, after a long day of preparation, Kale and Liara sat by the window, watching the city lights reflected in the water. I used to think survival was about avoiding danger, Liara said softly. Now I know it is about connection. About knowing someone stands with you and that you can stand with them. Kale nodded. And that connection gives you strength no weapon can match. Courage is nothing without something worth defending. And I've found that worth in you. Lyra's ears twitched. I feel the same. For the first time, I am not afraid of being discarded. I am not alone. And that makes me stronger than I have ever been. The following week brought more subtle challenges. Merchants tried to bribe Kale, offering credits and favors if he would release Liara. Others attempted to gather information about their routines, hoping to exploit weaknesses. But Kale and Liara were always one step ahead. Their cooperation, trust, and shared intelligence turned every attempt against them into an opportunity to learn and improve. It became clear to both of them that the world outside the dock would never fully accept them. Liara's age, her species, and the circumstances of her abandonment made her a target for prejudice and exploitation. Kale's willingness to protect her made him a target as well. But rather than fear, this realization gave them focus. They were no longer passive victims. They were active participants in shaping their destiny. One night, as they reviewed maps of the docks and surrounding districts, Liara spoke with quiet determination. We need to think ahead. They will escalate. We cannot rely on hiding or defense alone. We need options. Kale leaned back, considering. Options. Yes. Mobility, alliances, leverage. We prepare not just for defense, but for action, for choice. That is what they fear the unknown. Us, making our own decisions. Liara nodded, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the maps. And in that unknown, we have each other. That is something they cannot take. Weeks turned into a month, and the bond between Kale and Liara deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They shared small joys, repairing a stubborn engine together, laughing at mistakes, and watching sunsets that turned the water into molten gold. Each moment of trust, each act of cooperation, strengthened the invisible thread connecting them. Yet, beneath the daily routines, tension remained. Every sound in the night, every approaching shadow reminded them that the outside world had not forgotten. The merchants, the enforcers, the whisperers, they would return. And when they did, Kale and Liara would need more than clever tricks and makeshift barriers. They would need courage, skill, and a bond strong enough to withstand the storm that was surely coming. One evening, Liara turned to Kale, her expression serious. "You've risked everything for me. I cannot allow that to continue without being more than a burden. I want to help. Truly help. Teach me what you know. Teach me to think like you, to act like you, to survive beside you, not just because of you." Kale smiled, a mixture of pride and affection. "Then we learned together. You are not a burden. You are my partner. And together, we are stronger than they will ever expect." It was so. As the moon rose over the harbor, casting silver light on the water and the crates below, Kale and Liara sat together, planning, learning, and preparing. They were no longer just a lonely human and a discarded Vulpine. They were a team, a force quietly growing in strength, ready to face a world that had underestimated them both. In the calm after the storm, one thing was clear: the battle had only begun. But with courage, intelligence, and trust, Kale and Liara were ready to challenge a society that measured worth by age and appearance. And in doing so, they were beginning a story that would not just change their lives, but perhaps shake the very docks they called home. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance, patience, and trust. Kale and Liara had grown into a rhythm together, their partnership stronger with each passing day. They repaired machines, prepared defenses, and quietly observed the movements of the docks. Yet, the shadow of the merchants and enforcers hung over them, constant and menacing. Every day brought the threat of confrontation. But they refused to cower. Kale had learned something crucial about Liara during this time. She was far more capable than anyone had assumed. She adapted quickly to the workshop systems, learning to operate the machinery and even improving some of Kale's designs. Her intelligence and foresight were unmatched, and Kale often found himself marveling at her quick mind. She was no longer just someone he protected. She was his equal, his partner in every sense of the word. One morning, as the sun broke through the mist over the harbor, Liara approached Kale with a determined look. "We cannot stay here forever," she said. "They will return, and next time, they may not be so forgiving. We need a plan that gives us freedom, not just temporary safety." Kale considered her words carefully. He had thought about it, of course, but Lyra's insight always added clarity. "I agree. We need to think beyond the workshop. Mobility, strategy, and alliances. We cannot face them alone forever." Liara nodded, her ears twitching. "Then we prepare. But we do it together. You taught me trust. Now it is time to act." Their preparation became more intensive. Kale and Liara mapped out escape routes, studied the patrol patterns of the enforcers, and secured supplies that could last weeks. They reinforced the workshop with hidden exits, alarms, and traps that would slow anyone attempting to breach their sanctuary. Liara's knowledge of alien customs proved invaluable, as she anticipated tactics the enforcers might employ. Despite the tension, there were moments of quiet humanity. One evening, Kale prepared a small meal, and they ate together in the dim light of the workshop. Liara smiled faintly, her tail curling around her feet. "I never thought I would share a meal like this," she said softly. "Without fear, without expectation, just living." Kale chuckled lightly. "It's strange, isn't it? The simplest things can feel extraordinary when the world is against you." Liara's ears flicked. "Extraordinary. That is what it feels like. To be safe, to be understood, to have someone who sees you as more than an object. Their moments of peace were fleeting but precious. They reminded them why they fought, why they prepared, and why they trusted each other so completely. Yet, danger was never far away. One afternoon, the sound of footsteps on the dock drew their attention. Cale peered through the workshop window, his brow furrowing. A group of enforcers had arrived, larger than before, with new faces and the unmistakable authority of power. Torvik led them, his expression hardened with determination. "They're back," Liara whispered, "and stronger than last time." Cale nodded, moving quickly to activate the defenses they had prepared. "We can delay them, but we cannot stay here indefinitely. We need a solution, one that removes the threat permanently." As the enforcers approached, Cale and Liara worked in seamless coordination. Traps slowed the intruders, alarms drew their attention away, and carefully timed distractions gave them precious seconds. Liara guided Cale, predicting movements and suggesting tactical maneuvers, while Cale managed the mechanisms and ensured that every defensive measure worked as intended. Despite their preparation, reached the workshop doors. He slammed them open, his voice booming. "This ends now. Release the Vulpine immediately, or face the consequences." Cale stood firm, his eyes locked on Torvik. "She is not yours to take. She chooses to stay." Liara stepped beside him, her golden eyes flashing with resolve. "And I choose to stay. I am not property. I am not yours to command." Torvik's face twisted in anger. "You cannot defy the law." Cale's voice was calm but unwavering. "Sometimes the law is wrong. Sometimes what is right matters more than what is written on paper. We will not bow to injustice." The standoff lasted tense minutes, each side measuring the other. The enforcers were skilled and numerous, but Cale and Liara were united, clever, and determined. The tide of the confrontation shifted when Cale and Liara triggered a series of escape mechanisms. Hidden doors swung open, walls slid aside, and smoke from small smoke generators filled the workshop. In the chaos, they slipped through a secret exit, leaving the enforcers disoriented and enraged. Outside, the city streets stretched before them, rain slick and empty in the late evening. They moved swiftly, guided by pre-planned routes and signals. Every step was calculated, every corner anticipated. Their escape was not reckless. It was deliberate, precise, and fueled by the determination to survive together. After reaching a safe distance, they paused in a small alleyway. Liara leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "That was close," she admitted, ears twitching nervously. "They are relentless. And next time, they may not hesitate to harm us." Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Then we don't wait for them to strike. We take control of our lives. We make decisions that ensure we are never at their mercy again." Liara looked at him, her golden eyes reflecting the determination he felt in his own heart. "And what do you propose?" Cale's gaze softened, but his voice held certainty. "We make a choice. A commitment that ensures your safety and our freedom. We bind ourselves together not because of obligation or fear, but because we trust each other. Because we value life, choice, and courage, we marry." The word hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Liara's ears twitched in surprise. "Marry instantly?" "Yes," Cale said firmly. "We don't need ceremony or witnesses. We don't need approval. We choose each other. And in that choice, we create safety, respect, and a bond no one can break." Liara's golden eyes softened. She had been abandoned, discarded, and underestimated all her life. And yet, here was someone offering not pity, but partnership, not control, but trust. Slowly, she nodded. "Then, we do this. I trust you. I choose you." Cale smiled faintly, relief and warmth flooding him. He had long lived in solitude, surrounded by machines and silence. Now, he had someone who understood him, who trusted him, and who would stand beside him no matter the odds. "Then we are bound," he said simply. They performed the act quietly. without witnesses, without ceremonies, just to beings making a choice that transcended societal expectation, prejudice, and fear. Their hands joined, their eyes met, and in that instant, they became a unit. Their bond was not merely emotional. It was practical, protective, and powerful. The streets around them were quiet, the city seemingly holding its breath. For the first time, Kale and Liara felt a sense of permanence. They were no longer fugitives clinging to temporary safety. They were a team, a family in their own right. Capable of facing the world together, the weeks that followed their instant marriage were not without tension. Rumors of their defiance spread further, and some dock workers whispered in awe, while others seethed with resentment. The merchants were furious, but Kale and Liara's unity made them unpredictable. Every attempt to intimidate or manipulate them failed, and their reputation quietly grew out as rebels. But as individuals who refused to accept injustice, inside the workshop, life took on a new rhythm. They shared responsibilities, repaired machines together, and planned strategies for long-term survival. Liara's skills complemented Kale's knowledge perfectly. Their trust allowed them to move with precision and confidence. Even small gestures, sharing meals, exchanging ideas, or simply sitting in silence became symbols of their bond, of the courage and respect that underpinned their relationship. One night, after a particularly long day of preparation, they sat by the window, watching the reflection of city lights ripple on the water. Liara rested her head on Kale's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and trust. "I never imagined this," she murmured. "Being free, being respected, being chosen." Kale wrapped an arm around her, a quiet warmth spreading through him. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But sometimes the right choice doesn't wait for ceremony or approval. It waits for courage and trust." And we had both. The world outside remained indifferent, filled with challenges, prejudice, and the expectations of others. But inside their small sanctuary, Kale and Liara had created something that no outside force could take: mutual respect, unwavering trust, and a partnership forged in adversity. They had faced the threat of the docks, the judgment of society, and the dangers of being outsiders. They had survived not because of strength alone, but because of strategy, intelligence, and the human qualities that made courage meaningful: empathy, integrity, and the willingness to stand for what was right. And in that, Kale and Liara found not just safety, but purpose. Their bond had become a shield and a sword, protecting them against a world that often valued conformity over compassion. It was a bond that could not be broken by fear, prejudice, or expectation. As the night deepened, the stars reflecting on the calm waters of the harbor, Kale realized that their instant marriage had been more than a practical decision. It was a declaration, a promise, a statement that human courage, morality, and trust could create strength where others saw weakness, and hope where others saw despair. And Liara, resting beside him, understood it too. For the first time in her life, she was truly free, not just from the hands that had discarded her. The weeks after their instant marriage were tense but hopeful. Kale and Liara had escaped immediate danger, but the docks in the city beyond remained hostile territory. The house of Catherine and the dock merchants were furious over their defiance. Yet they could not act openly without risking scandal and exposure. This gave Kale and Liara a fragile window of safety, enough to consider their next move. They spent their days preparing for a future where they would not be at the mercy of others. The workshop became both home and fortress. Hidden compartments held supplies and tools. Escape routes led to the harbor, the alleys, and even the rooftops of nearby buildings. Liara studied maps of the city and surrounding regions, her sharp mind calculating safe paths, safe havens, and areas to avoid. Kale reinforced the doors, repaired machinery, and built devices to detect intruders. Together, they became a team of unparalleled efficiency. But even amidst the planning, they allowed themselves small moments of normalcy. They shared meals and stories, laughed quietly over minor mistakes, and watched sunsets paint the harbor in gold and crimson. These moments reminded them why they were fighting, not just for survival, but for freedom, dignity, and the choice to live their lives fully. One evening, as the sky turned a deep violet and the city lights glimmered like scattered jewels across the water, Liara spoke quietly. "We cannot remain here forever," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The longer we stay in the city, the more danger we invite. We need a new place, a home of our own, where no one can dictate our worth or control us." Kale nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking the same. I know of a small settlement beyond the northern cliffs. It's remote, almost forgotten by the city. Few come there, and the land is fertile. We could start fresh." Lyra's ears twitched. "Then we go. But we do it carefully. One misstep, and the merchants will be on us before we know it." Over the next days, they finalized their plan. They packed supplies into discreet containers, disguised their movements, and used the secret escape routes Kale had built over time. Liara's knowledge of alien patrols and customs allowed them to move without drawing attention. Every detail mattered. Every precaution was necessary. The night they left, the city was asleep, unaware of the quiet rebellion slipping through its streets. Kale and Liara moved swiftly, shadows among shadows, crossing alleys, climbing rooftops, and eventually reaching the harbor. A small shuttle, hidden in a crumbling warehouse, awaited them. It was not fast or flashy, but it would carry them safely to the cliffs beyond the northern settlements. Liara piloted the shuttle, her hands steady despite the tension. Kale sat beside her, scanning the city lights fading in the distance. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" he asked quietly. Liara smiled faintly. "All the time. I never imagined a human would see me for who I truly am. I never imagined a life where I am not judged for age or appearance." Kale reached out, taking her hand. "Neither did I, but sometimes the right person appears when you least expect it. And sometimes they change everything." The shuttle rose into the night sky, the city shrinking below them. The wind outside was replaced by the hum of the engines, and the stars stretched across the heavens in endless brilliance. Liara leaned against Kale, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "I am ready for a new life," she said softly. "A life where we are free." Kale squeezed her hand. "We will have that life. Together." They traveled for hours, moving silently across the cliffs and plains, avoiding patrols and settlements. Finally, they reached the northern cliffs, a remote area where the ocean crashed against jagged rocks below. Here, the land was wild but alive, filled with forests, streams, and open fields. It was a place untouched by the rigid rules and prejudices of the city. Kale and Liara disembarked, surveying the land. "This will be our home," Kale said, his voice filled with quiet awe. "We can build here, live freely, and protect ourselves, without fear." Lyra's ears twitched with excitement. "It is beautiful, quiet, safe. We can start fresh, and no one will judge us here." Over the next weeks, they worked tirelessly. They built a small shelter, expanded it into a sturdy home, and created gardens and water systems to sustain themselves. Kale used his engineering skills to create simple but effective tools, while Liara applied her knowledge of strategy and survival to organize their daily routines. Every day, they grew stronger, not just in skill, but in confidence and trust. Life in the cliffs was not easy, but it was rewarding. They faced storms, repaired shelters, hunted and gathered food, and celebrated small victories together. Each challenge reinforced their bond. Kale admired Lyra's resilience and intelligence. She admired his courage and integrity. In this wild, untamed land, they were equals in every sense. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on a hill overlooking the cliffs, watching the sun set over the ocean. Liara leaned against Kale, her tail curling around her feet. "I never thought freedom could feel like this," she said softly. "Calm, safe, and ours. We are more than survival. We are alive." Kale nodded, taking in the view. "We have each other. That makes us stronger than any obstacle. The city, the merchants, the rules, they cannot reach us here. Our choices define us, not the judgments of others." As days turned into weeks, Kale and Liara established a small but thriving life. They explored the cliffs, discovered hidden caves, and learned the rhythms of the wild land. They created a home filled with warmth, laughter, and companionship. Lyra's golden eyes often reflected a sense of wonder. Kale felt a peace he had not known in decades. Yet even in this remote land, they remained vigilant. Kale monitored the skies for signs of pursuit, while Lyra planned strategies to ensure they could defend themselves if necessary. Their bond was both emotional and practical, a partnership that combined courage, intelligence, and trust. One morning, while exploring a nearby forest, they discovered evidence of other travelers' small footprints, discarded tools, and signs of habitation. Kale frowned. "We are not entirely alone," he said. Lyra's ears twitched. "No, but it does not worry me. We have each other, and we are prepared. Nothing can take that from us." They continued their exploration, learning the lay of the land, mapping safe routes, identifying areas for future expansion. The cliffs offered isolation, but also opportunity, a chance to create a life entirely of their own making. One evening, as they returned to their shelter, Lyra paused, looking out over the ocean. "Kale," she said quietly, "I have been thinking. Our life here, it is more than survival. It is proof that courage, trust, and human compassion can create something lasting, even when the world expects failure." Kale smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are right. We are proof that humanity's true strength is not in weapons or dominance, but in empathy, courage, and the willingness to stand for what is right. Together we are stronger than fear, stronger than judgment." As night fell, they sat by the small fire outside their shelter, watching the stars reflect on the ocean. The world beyond the cliffs seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Here, in this wild and beautiful land, they had found what they had long sought: freedom, purpose, and each other. Over time, they expanded their home, planting gardens, constructing stronger shelters, and creating a life that was sustainable and peaceful. They faced challenges of course storms, injuries, and the occasional wild animal, but each obstacle strengthened their bond and sharpened their skills. Life was not easy, but it was theirs, shaped by choice, courage, and partnership. Lyra often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from being discarded and underestimated to finding a human who valued her for who she truly was. She had been abandoned, judged, and overlooked. Yet now she stood as an equal partner and beloved. And Kale, once a lonely man in a quiet workshop, had discovered purpose, companionship, and a life filled with meaning he had never imagined. One morning, as the sun rose over the cliffs, painting the ocean in gold, Lyra turned to Kale. "We have come far," she said, "from the docks, the storms, and the threats, to this, a life we created together." Kale nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, and we will continue to grow, explore, and protect what we have. Not just for ourselves, but for the proof that life, trust, and courage matter more than prejudice and fear." They embraced a quiet but powerful affirmation of their journey. The cliffs stretched endlessly before them, the ocean crashing against the rocks below. The wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers, the sky stretched vast and open, and the stars promised endless possibilities. Kale and Lyra had faced fear, prejudice, and danger, and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. Their love, trust, and courage had not only ensured survival, but had created a life filled with purpose, respect, and hope. The city and its rules were behind them, relevant to the world they were building together. As the waves lapped the cliffs and the stars appeared in the night sky, Kale looked at Lyra. "We are free," he said softly. Lyra's golden eyes reflected the starlight. "And we are together. That is enough." In the wild cliffs beyond the harbor, two beings, human and Vulpine, had forged a new life, one defined by choice, courage, and mutual respect. They had turned fear into strength, abandonment into partnership, and judgment into freedom. And in that, they had found not just survival, but the true meaning of life.